Hey, founders, welcome. I am stoked as always. We have a little bit of a different guest today. I have Rebecca Brown with me, and too long did not read. Spoiler alert, she is Shark Tank alumni. Okay. And as founders, especially if you're in the CPG space or you're working with consumer brands, everybody knows what Shark Tank is. I'm pretty sure so many of our founders at startups.com think about, oh, what would it be like to be on Shark Tank? I actually know founders who have received investment from one of the sharks. And I'll just be straightforward. The name is very fitting, getting investment from one of the sharks. And Rebecca's story is really interesting because it doesn't necessarily go the way that you might think, but it goes the way that I want our founders to think about. And so Rebecca is now an advisor to other startups, and we've been working together and trading founders and advising and helping each other. So she's a friend of startups.com, someone that I've been enjoying as far as getting to know her. And let's take a look at some of the pictures here just to go down memory lane. The company was SoulMates. You can actually Google the episode right there. You just look up Becca Brown, SoulMates, Shark Tank, and there she is pitching. And you can imagine what that went through. I've got tons of questions because I've heard lots of stories about what actually happens on Shark Tank versus what you see on the television. And then here we are, you got Mr. Robert Herjavec, wearing female, Mr. Wonderful, all that stuff there. So that was a fascinating episode to watch. I'm going to say welcome, Rebecca Brown. Thank you, Becca, for joining us today.
Thank you, Ed. It's my pleasure to be here.
Let's start right from the beginning. Give us the thumbnail version of your Shark Tank experience, starting from the company's inception, applying to Shark Tank, and what happened after all the dust settles on that Shark Tank episode.
Yes, there's a lot to unpack, but the thumbnail sketch of that is we started the business, SoulMates, about 5 years before going on Shark Tank. So we had an existing business, we had a distribution, we had revenues. And just for those who may not know, SoulMates is a shoe and foot care brand that makes all kinds of different shoe and foot accessories that make your shoes more comfortable. So the hallmark product is a high heel protector, so your heels don't sink into grass at weddings and parties and graduations. And it was born out of necessity after ruining many heels at outdoor events. So after being in business for about 5 years, we thought, this is a great opportunity to apply to Shark Tank. I was, of course, a huge fan of the show. I'd watched it for many years myself. And my partner and I had gone to Columbia Business School, and they were actually having an open audition at Columbia Business School for Columbia-founded companies to pitch to the Shark Tank producers. So we pitched to that, and we made it through the first round. And the second round was to submit a video. And we unfortunately completely flopped at that. We overproduced the video. We scripted it. We were sitting down in a room with like way too much lighting. And we did not get asked to the third round, which was really devastating. And it's something that a lot of people don't know if they've heard about our story before. So about a year later, we thought, you know what, we've got to give this another try. And we were staying in touch with the producers from Shark Tank. So we decided to reach out to them and send what we thought was sort of a Hail Mary email, like give us one more shot. And they did. They said, yes, we love you. We love your story. Send us a video. So we got a second chance, which doesn't always happen in business, but when you do, you have to take it. So we submitted a much better video that was really just us telling our story, talking very genuinely, telling kind of the origins of SoulMates. And that got us into the third round, which was to then work with producers over a period of like 6 months to go through your pitch and kind of how you would put the segment together, and ultimately landed us in LA actually taping the show. So what happened in the show, and I can go into all the details about leading up to going to actually be on the set, we were very fortunate to get 2 offers, one from Robert, one from Kevin. We accepted Robert's on the show. In real life, in the following months after we taped, we realized that the terms of the deal were not going to be the greatest for SoulMates. So we ended up not doing the deal in real life, which happens to about 80% of the companies they show. So it's pretty standard that deals that they show on TV don't actually happen in real life. But it was an amazing experience, very surreal for a reality TV show. We were on the set for about an hour and a half pitching to the sharks. It was as chaotic as you can imagine by design, highly edited down to about an 8-minute segment. When it aired on national television several months later, it was the first time we were seeing it in the edited form. Yes,
Hmm.
we had lived it, but when you sign the Shark Tank contract, it's this 50-page document. It's basically signing away your rights to any sort of how they want to portray you. So we did not know how they would portray us until we were watching that live show with millions of other people. And so fortunately, it painted us as founders in a pretty positive light. Of course, there's some horror stories. It doesn't always go that way. And it ended up being an amazing event for the brand, for the business. It catapulted SoulMates to launch into CVS nationwide. A bunch of other opportunities came from the exposure. So in the end, I mean, even though we didn't get an investment, it was definitely worth it for the brand exposure. And as a business owner, the process of going through that, a lot of lessons learned and a lot of ways that we could capitalize on that opportunity, despite not actually getting a check for, $500,000. So in the end, it was a great experience. I'm happy to kind of drill into it further, but it was a great catalyst for growth of the company.
Let's summarize. I think it's very important for founders to think about here. You already had significant traction. You were an established company. If you can share, what were your revenues before you went to Shark Tank?
Yeah, we did about 1.2 million the year before Shark Tank. So we had traction. And
Absolutely.
that's an important point, and we can kind of get into that a little bit.
Yeah, and you see it, they'll grill your business and you need to know your numbers. Shark Tank is not a pre-seed investment model, whatsoever. And it is very heavily geared towards CPG, that because they it's tangible, and it's also great television, and you can really get into it, and it inspires people. I could become a CPG entrepreneur and a founder. The other thing is the video that you talked about. Again, it's the same principle. Investors want to invest in founders, not companies. And so your personality has to shine through, because one, they're doing television, but other investors, like if you apply to Y Combinator, you send a 1-minute video, they don't want you to overproduce it, etc. It's some really good lessons to learn in terms of how you approach videos when you're fundraising. And then finally, the deal was just not good for your company, and you decide to say no. And obviously the exposure helped a lot. What ended up happening with SoulMates after the show? Like, did you see how much of a spike in sales did you see? And then eventually what happened to SoulMates? Because here you are, you're not SoulMates anymore. So what was the conclusion of the company?
Yeah. Well, the SoulMates company is still thriving today and growing. And Shark Tank was a great moment in history of SoulMates. It certainly opened a lot of doors, literally, because CVS was an opportunity that presented itself to having that mass audience exposure. And so we definitely saw a huge spike in the sales from the airing all the way through the rest of that year, really, because it set up the company to expand quite massively. And so it's still something that, and it re-airs on CNBC. So every time there's a re-air, there's always a nice little pop in terms of activity and sales, and people get sort of re-engaged in a way. And so the business is actively still growing and thriving. And I would say Shark Tank, Oprah and Shark Tank were probably the two biggest kind of press features for the brand over the course of about a 10-year period.
Okay,
And
hang on a second. You said
yeah.
Oprah. I didn't know this when I was researching. What's the Oprah story?
Oh yeah, this was early on. So Oprah featured SoulMates in her magazine as a genius product, and the high heel protector, because Oprah actually used the high heel protector at a wedding in Beverly Hills with her best friend Gayle King. And it's a really amazing story that was really serendipitous, and I would say impossible to orchestrate, even if you worked with one of the best PR agencies in the world. We were early on in the company's history, like less than a year in, and living in New York City. All the editors for the top magazines are in New York, so we didn't have a budget to hire an agency. So we decided to do the press outreach ourselves. We knew the editors we wanted to target. I had always been an Oprah show fan, and Gail, I knew, was the editor of Oprah magazine at the time. So we started dropping off press kits to all the editors, and I hand delivered one to Gail's office. And I knew that she was a big pizza fan from Mariella's Pizza across the street at the time. So I decided to order a pizza alongside with my press kit so I would get her attention, because of course she gets a lot of pitches all day long. So I ordered the pizza, dropped off the press kit, and just kind of crossed my fingers and went on with my day. A couple days later, I got a call from a Chicago number, and it wouldn't stop calling me. I didn't pick it up because I didn't know who it was, and it just kept calling. So I finally picked it up. It was Gail King calling me to interview me live on her radio show, because she had just used SoulMates at this wedding in Beverly Hills. And when she got back to New York, trying to remember what was the name of that high heel protector, she walked into her office and there was my press kit that her staff had put front and center on her desk because I ordered pizza.
Whoa, wait a second. So she had independently used.
Independently, by
That's
coincidence.
great.
By coincidence, a wedding planner from New York had ordered a bunch of SoulMates just off our website and shipped them to this beautiful wedding in Beverly Hills. And Oprah and Gail were guests, and Gail was actually doing a reading at the wedding, and it was on grass. So the wedding planner had so consciously considered all the female guests in heels, and she gave every guest a pair of SoulMates. So Gail had been nervous about walking on this grass and her probably, Jimmy Choo's or gorgeous heels. And the wedding planner gave her a pair of SoulMates, and she thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And she was trying to remember the name of these heel protectors on her way back to New York, and she literally walked in her office Monday morning, and there was the samples that I had dropped off. So that's what prompted her to call me on national radio and interview me on the spot. And she told me that story on the radio on the show, and I didn't even know it. So because of that, she and Oprah put us in the magazine, put SoulMates in the magazine, and flagged it as a genius product. And that was truly the first kind of putting SoulMates on the map press event. So for me, as a longtime Oprah fan, I mean, that was truly a dream come true. So I consider Oprah and Shark Tank as the two greatest mass press kind of awareness events for SoulMates brand.
Okay, let's pull some principles out here for all the founders that are listening. You may say serendipity, but there's a lot of hard work that went into lining those moments up. So we say fortune favors the prepared, right? So you did the hard work of dropping off the press kit, all those things, and then you're getting distribution, all that stuff for the stars to align, which, they clearly did. That's the first thing. Second thing, and I'd like to talk about this a little more later on, and for you to keep this in mind, because a lot of CPG founders, they think that people need their product, but do they want it? Do consumers really want your product because you're solving a problem? Something like your product solving the problem of walking on grass, protecting your heels on grass, that is a legitimate problem, a big enough problem for wedding planners to think about, for people to have that in their consciousness and constantly to be thinking about. So, there are products that are category defining or solve a problem that say, oh, I'm so glad you did this. But then there are products that are like, man, it's just something that's an iteration or a derivative of things out there. And I think founders can get wrapped up in confusing the two and think that they should be getting investors and all this press because their product is so amazing, when it's really not solving a problem. It might be novel and unique, but it's not solving a problem. So I want to pull that out and just kind of have you think about that and speak to it as we go through and we talk. How did you exit SoulMates? Let's wrap the story up with the ending there.
Well, I haven't exited SoulMates. I'm still an owner of the business, and the business is still thriving and growing. That's been, obviously the pandemic had an impact on the business because it's largely correlated to weddings and events, and those were not happening during the pandemic. And I'm happy to talk about how the business was able to pivot, which is something that any business owner is going to have to think about as well. But I love your question really about going to where the need is and presenting your solution. And just, if I may make a comment on how we did that, when we were first launching, the only product that SoulMates had was the high heel protector. So we knew we needed to create buzz, and we wanted to be in a place where women were truly having the problem of heels sinking into the grass. So we orchestrated our launch over beta launch over the series of several weeks, going to polo events, going to polo matches in the Hamptons. And we were literally selling products
That's
and had
awesome.
women. Yeah, we had these well-heeled women going to these polo matches, drinking champagne. And of course, they were sinking into the grass. And this was the solution right there. So it was like giving someone an umbrella in the rain. So it was a very poignant opportunity to acquire customers. And the nice thing about doing an event like that, which I would recommend to any business, any CPG, is you not only get customers, but you also get press and you get content that you can then repurpose to acquire more customers. You get photography, you get testimonials. So all of these layers that also help identify the need that you are solving for and your customers. One thing I love about a lot of what you do, Ed, is you make sure that business owners really know their customers and engage with their customers before they go out and try to raise $1 million. Really understand who's your audience, who's buying your product, who are you servicing? Because sometimes who you think it is ends up being a little different from reality. And that's what's so critical about getting out there and interacting with your customers and fine-tuning your acquisition strategy and your marketing strategy, because you can literally pour money at anything. But if you want to grow a business, you have to know who is your customer and who you're helping and whose lives you're enhancing.
It's called customer discovery and customer validation, which is absolutely fantastic. If you can get on the front lines, the people who are experiencing that pain point and deliver the solution, see the reactions and what have you, you are figuring out problem, solution, fit. But then you just said what I love, and I didn't even consider all the attention, the media, you can do it to get to product market fit because distribution is going to happen, what have you. And even though you weren't direct to consumer in the beginning, or did you go through retail? Like, what was your distribution strategy in the beginning of SoulMates?
We were only D2C to start, but we quickly started going to brick and mortar because we lived in New York City. There were a bunch of shoe repair shops, there were wedding boutiques, there were shoe stores. So literally I would like cold call. I got kicked out of several stores because I was like pitching the owner. So, and this is what you have to do as an entrepreneur. You have to be, scrappy, and you have to get out there. And I think yes, I have my MBA and I loved Columbia Business School as an experience, but the reality is when you're running or launching a business, there's no substitute for getting out there and doing things and trying things and getting doors closed in your face and getting people to give you feedback, because that's how you get better. And I think that there's a little bit of a tendency to, want to delay doing all that stuff because you think you have to get everything lined up and you think everything has to be perfect. Throw that mentality out the window. You will be better as soon as you start trying things and getting out there and actually executing. And I'm not advocating doing those things prematurely. Obviously, you need to have a website, you need to have products and inventory and some basis of a business, but you also, I think there's sort of that paralysis by analysis mentality that sometimes entrepreneurs can get is, oh, I'm not ready to do that until, I get my funding or everything is perfect. Nothing is ever perfect. You just have to get out there and start doing.
The concept of getting out there to your customers really boils down to learn how to sell. Like,
yes.
Don't be afraid, sell, because the greatest feedback is going to happen if you get the door shut in your face or after you tell them the price. You get the feedback right in their spot. You can observe, what have you. I know, some of the startups that I'm involved in right now are CPG driven, and I've overproduced stock and I have it there. And then I go out, my first thing to sell, and suddenly I see a behavior and I'm like, crap, I have an extra 1,000 units of this inventory. If I would have just gotten and start to sell this ahead of time, I would have gotten the feedback before I spent the money. And now I got all this inventory, right? And so these are principles. We're going to pull that apart here. Let me set the stage here and let's start doling out some advice for the other CPG founders and really any founder out there. So now you're still involved with SoulMates, but you chose to step back. So it looks like you've been able to kind of separate yourself from the day-to-day operation, which is really great to know. I think a lot of founders want to do that. How come you haven't exited? Or I'm sure there's been opportunities for an exit in some manner. What was the decision-making behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's always the dream for a lot of founders, is to build it, scale it, grow it, and then exit. And that's certainly true with SoulMates. The alignment hasn't kind of, been where we want it to be yet. We kind of were starting to explore that prior to the pandemic, but then when COVID hit, it didn't make sense to, kind of continue on that path. So I think if anything, the business is stronger today than it was a couple years ago, having the ability to weather the pandemic, which hopefully will be the hardest, business environment that any business has really dealt with. But ultimately, someday, I think that is the strategy, to probably sell it to either a big shoe company or another CPG. I mean, one thing I'll say about the brand is it's way more than just the high heel protector. SoulMates makes everything from blister blocking balms, which were very popular during the pandemic. Even, actually, this is a really cool story. Frontline healthcare workers were getting terrible face chafing from wearing masks. And they were asking SoulMates, can I use your blister blocker on my face? And
Wow.
yes, because all of our products are non-toxic, no harsh ingredients, made in the USA, environmentally friendly. So we ended up doing a donation program to frontline healthcare workers to give the blister blockers so that they could at least get some relief from this awful face chafing that they were suffering from. So blister blockers, deodorizing sprays, insoles. I think of SoulMates today as sort of a cross between Dr. Scholl's and Burt's Bees, if you're familiar with those
Yeah.
brands. And it's a very cool brand. It's geared towards the customer need. The origins of the business is that I had this problem of sinking into the grass, so I wanted to create a solution. And that's been kind of the genesis of all the other products that have been launched under the brand umbrella. So it really has carved out a space in the accessories or in the solutions business, largely geared towards female customers, but we do have other products that are kind of neutral, gender neutral. And so I think there's a lot of runway ahead for SoulMates. And when the time comes to formally exit, that'll be an exciting event. But it's been a great experience so far, and I know there's a lot more to come.
And what are the other things you did? So we were going to talk about that. And again, another example of fortune favoring preparation, like those who are prepared with everything that you had set up. And it just so happens COVID, which is a black swan event for all intents and purposes, and you seeing that opportunity, and suddenly a category is born out of that. You get more brand exposure. What are some other things that you did during the pandemic that has resulted in what you're saying is we're stronger than ever?
Yeah. So early on, we realized, we were not an essential business. So in the state of New York, those businesses were forced to shut down. There was a state of emergency. So we realized that there were a couple things there was a lot that was out of our control, but there were a couple things that we still had control of. And one was to lean into our customer base and connect with them, and to make sure that, we could provide resources. We launched a small business spotlight on our blog so we could highlight other small business owners that we work with, whether they were boutiques or suppliers. And we wanted to make sure that we sort of enforce this "we're all in this together" mentality. We started publishing health and wellness topics and sending emails to our customers. And when the frontline healthcare workers started emailing SoulMates in April of 2020, it was like instantly we were able to mobilize our customer base and say, hey, look, we want to all support these frontline healthcare workers. We're launching a donation program, buy one, give one. So if you buy a blister blocker off of the company website, we will donate a blister blocker to a frontline healthcare worker. And it was overnight. We had tens of thousands of customers emailing, and enabled SoulMates to then donate to dozens of hospitals around the country. And so there were things like that that we saw as opportunities to keep the business going, but also really extend ourselves to try to offer some help or support or resources. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Whether you're selling a physical product or a service, you have something to offer, which hopefully is making people's lives better, improving their lives, enhancing their lives. And you cannot operate in isolation. You're dependent on your colleagues and your team members and your suppliers and your investors. And I think the pandemic really highlighted that, and how important those connections are, whether you're starting day one in your business or you're 10 years in. Those connections are truly what creates intrinsic value in your business. And it'll enable you to weather those storms. So those were a couple things that we did. And there was no playbook for COVID. So I think, as a business owner, you just had to be nimble and think compassionately, but think creatively at the same time. And talking with other business owners, I think the ones that were able to do that survived and thrived throughout the pandemic.
For sure. Well, you look at all different types of industries, like, the restaurants that went into delivery and retrofit, almost become ghost kitchens and, things like that. So you saw that all over the place. Now you're advising other startups. What's your consultancy
Yes.
under what banner?
Core Satellite Partners.
Core Satellite Partners. You're advising other startups. I'm sure people are constantly looking for advice from you because you've been there, done it on the front lines. What other types of startups are you working with right now?
Yes. Right now, it's a mix of CPG and some services. I started the advisory business about 6 years ago, really also out of kind of desire to help other founders in their journeys. It was very organic. It was just, some people I knew that kind of approached me, and I thought, well, it's time for me to kind of institutionalize this and make sure that I'm managing my own bandwidth. So I'll set up my advisory practice. And all of my clients have really been referrals, word of mouth, or friends of friends or connections from previous founders. And I've worked with a variety of CPG, but I've also expanded in the last couple of years to work with founders in fintech, biotech, health and wellness, food and beverage. And so it's been very interesting to expand my offering into other industries because obviously I've lived so much of my professional career in CPG. Prior to launching SoulMates, I did work at an investment bank, Goldman Sachs. So I did have my origins in finance, professionally speaking. But it's been great. And I work with my clients in a variety of different things at various stages. So I can work with clients pre-launch when they're first developing their business plan. I can help them with operations, whether it's a manufacturing partner match or product development. If they've already launched and they're looking to grow or scale their business, we can get into different sales and marketing projects, more product expansion. I can assist with fundraising, kind of a range of different areas. And then later stage, I've worked with companies that are planning to go public. I've been working with a fintech SPAC, looking for targets to merge with. So it's been personally very exciting to kind of expand my offering into all these other stages and different industries. And I love it. I think I just get so much satisfaction out of connecting with other founders and entrepreneurs and executive teams that it feels like such a natural expansion of my profession.
Let me ask you a question. And I don't think I've ever asked you this question, and might be a little unplanned. I might be putting you on the spot, but we can have a discussion about it. What do you think in your mind is the advantage and benefit of having an advisor over, let's say, like a management consultant or, some of these really specialized technical people in your experience? Because I know I'm pretty sold on having an advisor that kind of acts like a mentor who has the experience, learn from my experience, because you have all the experience, like the full Monty of experience. To you, if you're pitching someone, or let's say you're not even going to be their advisor, and a founder asks you, what's the point of getting an advisor? What would you say?
Well, it's kind of why I called my business Core Satellite Partners, which is if you're the founder, you're the core of your business. You started this business because you saw the need. Satellites are, I think, of experts or advisors that you bring on to help guide you along your path. And that's truly that's my philosophy when I engage with a client. I am here to supplement you, to give you my perspective on things that I've learned, and to help you get from where you are today to where you want to be. So that's why I've been able to do that with a variety of different types of businesses at different stages in different industries, because if you boil it all down, there are very similar issues that companies go through at all these different stages, whether they're early on, mid stage, late stage. And so that's something that's my personal philosophy. I can't really speak about other consultants or things that they may do for clients, but this has been my philosophy. And it's worked really well. And because I'm also a very much hands-on person, I can roll up my sleeves and get in there with the founder. Like, let's look at this. Let's solve this together. Product development, like I can actually become an extension of your team. So I think that there's a lot of sort of customizability there with how I work with my clients. It's not just this is one size fits all and this is the way we do it. And I really take time to create a customized approach with my clients based on their goals. And I want to make sure there's a fit. I really do. I mean, I think it's important to have a mutual kind of a fit on both sides. And that's something that when I do take on a client, we spend a lot of time to make sure that this is going to work well for each other.
All right, that's where you are a little different in the sense that some advisors just say, I'm going to be on the advisory board, contact me for my once a month meeting or my annual thing. And if you need something, I'll just give you advice. But you're much more hands-on. You're almost kind of like a stand-in, a fractional co-founder, if you
Yeah.
will, to provide, that management and fit the roles because you can fit so many roles. Okay. So that's where you're different. Let's go through, let's focus kind of on CPG, because I think that's where a lot of our founders at startups.com are feeling the pain. CPG and direct to consumer brands, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to list off the stages, okay, and kind of set some scenarios up. And you tell me the most important piece of advice that you would give at that stage.
Ooh,
Again, no, I'm
okay.
giving you on the spot. Let's think of it like a game show. All right.
Yeah, it sounds like a game show.
Great. So pre-product, idea stage, even before there's a thing, what would you advise a founder today?
Research. You have to research the market. I know ideas are great and they're so exciting, but someone may have already created it. So you need to research. And it's as simple as Googling and looking around online and just making sure that you know your market. And whatever your product idea is, learn how it fits into the existing market, how it's better than any other options out there currently. That has to be absolutely number one, hands down, first building block of your castle. You need to do that research. And I think that is step one. And then slightly after that is just then, as we talked about, figuring out who the customer is, because they go hand in hand. You can have a great product, but if nobody's going to buy it, it's not a business.
How do founders get over that confirmation bias in thinking their product is all that in a bag of chips when really it's not? It's not a 10x product. It's maybe an iterative 10% product. How would you advise people get out of their own bias that way?
Yeah, this is really where you need to start speaking with your prospective customers. And that can be done in a variety of different ways. You can do surveys, you can do social media efforts, you can get focus groups with people you know. But I think you do need to get through that confirmation bias and have more of an objective lens when you're looking at this. Is this a product? Is this an extension of an existing product? Is this a business? Those are three very different questions. And I think depending on the answers to those, then you can kind of proceed forward. I love that there's been so much of a spotlight put on entrepreneurship over the past decade. Certainly a lot of funding towards, startups and venture in the last several years, but you can't build a business without the fundamentals of a business. So product and customers, I mean, those are truly the most important features that you need to get through and confirm before you raise money or try to sell it at all.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Once again, everybody watching this, you're hearing this from someone who's been through it. Next question. I've gone out, I've validated, done customer discovery. I'm ready to build a prototype. So I know what I want to build. What should I be thinking of? What steps do I go through to get to prototype?
Well, the good thing is there are a lot of options for prototyping now versus when I started with SoulMates over a decade ago. So what I mean by that, if it's a physical product, there's, 3D printing is so prevalent. You can make a prototype in your living room. There are plenty of different resources online. If you just Google prototyping, again, depending on the category of the product, if it needs engineering, of course, you probably need an engineer. There's a great website called ThomasNet that some people may have heard about. It's a registry for pretty much all things manufacturing, industrial design, prototyping, packaging, fulfillment, all different types of suppliers, mostly in the realm of CPG. And this is a great starting point, especially if you're thinking about trying to prototype a physical product. And it's a good starting point to be able to then have conversations with potential suppliers or manufacturers. The other thing I'll say about this phase is that this is where you will learn so much. Unless you're an expert in manufacturing or designing, this is going to be a huge kind of intensive educational experience for you as a founder. The reality is most founders, they have ideas. They don't necessarily know all the steps that they have to go through to get that idea into a real product. And if they did, they may not actually want to pursue it because it can be a little bit overwhelming. But if you start making those phone calls and having those conversations with the designers, the manufacturers, the engineers, you will learn so much and it'll help refine your product. So don't be intimidated by it or overwhelmed. If anything, like look at this as an opportunity to get even better, and you're going to come out the other side with a much sounder product idea.
And there'll be less surprises. I know many
Yes.
founders, I've experienced this before. You get there, you find the manufacturer, and then you find out what the MOQ, minimum order quantity, is. And you're like, wait a second, this is going to
Yeah.
cost way more and all that stuff for a prototype, or just,
Yeah.
get something going, or the initial batch and what have you, depending on how specialized your product is. Again, 3D printing and a lot of things you can do yourself. That's the reason people like softwares, because you can prototype, a lot quicker. And, venture capitalists or investors understand this. So
Right.
go get a prototype and learn as much as possible. Next, I have the prototype. What do I do now?
Now you
What
need a
should be the
business
first
plan.
thing? Sorry?
You really need a business plan. And
Okay.
this is something that's also critical, is that yes, if you've been able to invest your time and resources to get to this point where you have a prototype for your idea, you've already done the surveys, you've already figured out who's, your customer and what the needs are, and you've created a prototype. Now you really need to spend some time and create a business plan. And it doesn't have to be a document that you distribute to anybody but yourself, but I think it's very important to go through the discipline of carving out what's your total addressable market, who's your customer, what does the production process look like the MOQs, what's the cost, what's the upfront, you have to buy raw materials, what's the packaging look like. So there are a lot of things within the operations that this would be the time that you really need to kind of drill down into that to figure out what it's going to take. And it also highlight any holes or any missing links or information that you need to also obtain before you then go to the next step. But then you ultimately need to figure out, how am I going to make my money back? If I'm going to go invest, a couple $100,000 on getting this thing into production, what's my sales plan? How am I selling this? How am I acquiring customers? What's my pricing? If it costs me $5, what am I going to sell it for at a retail price point? Is that enough to hire people? Is that enough to have a rent, pay for a lease or something like that? So this is why a business plan is so important. And obviously, as you can tell, within the business plan is a clear understanding of the financials of your business and how you plan to make your initial investment back and hopefully become profitable. And until you do all that, I don't think you should even think about raising outside capital.
Okay. Great question then. What happens if you need capital? You're not ready to go to outside capital, because we know, let's just be straightforward. You see it on Shark Tank. They'll eat your lunch. If
Yes.
you don't haven't thought through all that stuff, it's what, in sort of like the high tech VC world, we call working yourself through the idea maze. So you got an idea, but all the nooks and crannies and the turns, what happens if about this and competition and go to market strategy? Have you thought all that through? But let's say there's a founder out there and like, now I validate, it's great. Now I need to go raise money, but I'm not going to go to VCs. What would you recommend that they do?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And so with SoulMates, we raised through angel investors, and I think that that's something that is realistic for a lot of founders, especially if you've already gone through those first phases. You've clearly invested your time and your effort. If you get to that point and you realize you need to raise, $250,000, $300,000 for your seed funding, I think that angel is a good route for a lot of founders to take, unless they, have a wealthy family member that wants to be their sole investor. And the way to find angels, of course, there are a lot of avenues. I've always thought that having conversations with people and trying to get referrals, and it doesn't, if you know one person, you can potentially get a couple referrals from that person. And if you take sort of that idea through each of those referrals, it just becomes, 10 people, 12 people. And it's just statistics. If you can speak with 24 people, chances are maybe, one of them will be interested and have a follow-up conversation. So I think angel investors can be a good starting point for a lot of founders. Obviously, there are different ways to structure early stage investments. Safe notes have become very popular because of the sort of uncertainty of valuations in a pre-revenue business. And I think that, for a lot of my clients, that's been a vehicle of choice that's worked out quite well. Of course, there's crowdfunding. I haven't had direct experience with that. Some of my clients have done that and they've had successes, but I think you have to focus on that. And from my understanding, raising money is hard. No matter how you're going to do it, it's going to take your time. If you're a sole founder and you're doing the product development and you're doing the business plan and you're doing the fundraising, you need to be realistic that that's going to take a lot of your time. So think through how much you do need to raise and then put together your roadmap on how you're going to do that. And if it's angels, literally make a list of people you know, organizations, alumni networks, Chamber of Commerce, SBA, Small Business Administration, local business chapters. Start going through and put a Google spreadsheet together and just start writing down some of these names and set up meetings and ask for referrals. I mean, that's very effective, asking for referrals. I'm also a big fan of LinkedIn. Obviously, people get targeted on LinkedIn as prospective investors. I wouldn't cast your net so wide. I would keep it within your network, but you can message people and say, hey, I'm raising money for my new business. Here's a deck, and ask for referrals. People generally want to help, especially when they see a passionate founder. You just have to be organized and have your materials ready and then have those conversations.
Not all investors are the same, however, even angels. A lot of conversations I have with angel investors and, early stage funds who are willing to take a risk, they say we don't do CPG. And I ask them, what's the reason? Everybody's got an investment thesis. CPG is risky because supply chain issues, the margins usually aren't there. They know you're going to try to sell through. You have to sell through Amazon these days, and they're going to eat your margin like crazy. I know founders who move to Amazon and they might sell 3 times the inventory, but their margins are cut in half type thing. It's a crowded space. Lots of people want access to it. So some investors are like, we just don't do CPG. What's been your experience in finding those CPG, those investors? What's the landscape for you? How much have you experienced the same type of conversation that I had?
Yeah, definitely a little bit of that. I think that with SoulMates, at least, my kind of targeting and networking over the years was biased towards people that had an interest in CPG, whether they had come from CPG or brands, or they were, receptive to investments in that space. But on the flip side, some of my definitely the fintech and biotech clients that I've had, absolutely a lot of those investors, they're not interested in CPG. So it's a great point. And I think that goes back to something that no matter what you're doing, whether you're raising money or selling your product, you have to know your audience and you have to be aware of who your audience is and then refine your pitch or your messaging to that audience, while obviously keeping your business, core principles and making sure that you're relaying those core principles. But I think for me with SoulMates, the early investors were people I knew or friends of friends. I actually did meet an investor on an airplane, just a stranger that I struck up a conversation with. And that's another lesson that I always tell my clients is you always have to be ready to pitch when you're a founder, even if you have to write it in your phone as a note and then just kind of repeat it periodically so you have it down in your head. If you're good at pitching, it's not luck, it's just opportunities that present themselves to you and you're ready to capitalize on those. And then I think just get creative. You can look at on Crunchbase, you can see it's a little harder with pre-revenue, but you can still find some leads and then target certain investor groups through LinkedIn. And honestly, even if they're a venture fund that doesn't do your stage of investing, a lot of times they'll have a conversation just to kind of begin that discussion with you and potentially give you a referral to another angel that does do kind of CPG pre-seed or seed. So it's really networking. If you're uncomfortable networking with strangers, this is going to be challenging. And I won't sugarcoat that. I mean, raising money is hard and you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And I think that there are some tactics sort of mentally that you can use to overcome any anxiety you may feel, which is you're just having conversations. You're not asking people for money. You're just having conversations. You're excited about your business. You want to tell them what you're building. If you exude that excitement, people will pick up on it. And whether they write you a check or they give you a referral or they remember you, and a year later when you're doing your Series A, they say, oh yeah, Ed, he was really passionate about his business. And look at him now. Oh yeah, he did leave an impression on me. So I think that's something you almost have to be your own cheerleader, be your own sort of coach sometimes.
Sure.
Because these are difficult things to go through,
In
but
CPG,
you have to get out there.
Yeah, in CPG, they call it the hype beast. You got to be your own hype beast. So last question, general, second last question. Generally speaking, first customers, what are some ways founders should think about this? D2C, start pounding on doors like you did with retailers. What do they do first? Where are some avenues? What are you seeing these days that founders can do to get their first customers?
Yeah, I would, first off, I would hesitate overspending on ads on social. Obviously, with that post iOS, people have a much harder time getting positive or return on ad spend and conversions just by throwing a bunch of money on Facebook and Instagram ads. So I would say don't do that from the start. I would really go to where your customers are. So if they're, college students, or if they're young professionals living in urban environments, or if they're, baby boomers, like really wherever your customer is, what are they reading? Where are they shopping? What websites are they looking at? What television shows or what Netflix shows are they watching? Like think through who that customer is. One thing that a lot of my clients do, and I'm sure many people listening also, are create these personas of your customers and literally sketch them out. Like this is Jessica, she's 25, she lives in Philadelphia. And you go through, and that's such an effective process because it gets you into the mentality of those customers, and you then are able to understand like what would compel them to go to my website, to purchase my product. And it's a discipline because it gives you insight into who your customers really are. But I would say, try to find where they're. I think I'm a big fan of editorial press. I really have always enjoyed reaching out to journalists. And this is, again, if you have the budget to pay for a PR agency, by all means do it. They're worth it when you can find a good one. But I also think there's a lot of value to doing your own press. And what I mean by that is look at the journalists that are writing about relevant topics to your industry and reach out to them. Reach out to them through Twitter or through their blogs. You can usually find them on Instagram, and send them an email and tell them who you are, what your product is. If you can get a good editorial press piece, that will bring customers to you. And it'll also
Absolutely.
confirm your where your customer is and who your customer is. So I
And
would do those.
they're incentivized to listen to your story. Like they're looking
Yeah,
for stories. It's not like there are
exactly.
gatekeepers wanting to reject everything. They want to hear from you. So I think that's
Yes.
a mindset shift. Okay, last question. If you gave yourself advice and you had to do something differently through your experience with SoulMates, now that you've had time to reflect on it, what would you advise yourself to do differently than what you did?
There is a lot I could say to that question. I think that it would have been awesome to have a full product suite to launch, to raise more money up front and launch kind of a full line. We bootstrapped it. So we did we raised some money, we launched one product, we grew with that with our cash flow. We raised a little bit of more money. We grew our product line. So we kind of had these little natural kind of steps and phases. I think it would have been really cool to have to do fewer capital raises, but up maybe bigger, and then just have kind of the product suite and then launch it all together. And it's not to say that what we did wasn't effective. It was very effective. But I think it would have been exciting to kind of do it in bigger chunks like that. And also with brick and mortar, when you have a suite of products that you can bring to a retailer, it can be more compelling than just a one-off product.
Very true. Very true. And so then how does that advice relate to doing those experimentations? Like how I'm figuring in your mind, you would have still gone through the experimentation and prototyping of the suite of products first. You're talking about just now that you know the game, it's
Yeah,
just would have been an accelerator, if you will, to get to
yeah.
where, SoulMates got to.
Yeah, the first part of SoulMates and like the early stages and the prototyping, all that stuff, I would have done the same. But
Okay.
once we were kind of had a little bit of a market presence, I think maybe doing one or two bigger raises and having kind of a bigger suite of products to roll out, it
Gotcha.
might have had more of an impact. The way we did it was really over like 3 subsequent rounds and like a couple products along the way each time. But I just think like now the rate of change of a lot of companies now is faster because technology, because access to capital. So I think, and hindsight's 2020, I don't even know if we could have done this 8 years ago, but I think it would have been really exciting to raise more money and have more products kind of in one swath as opposed to a couple chunks along the way, but also would have required hiring a lot more people and probably, bigger infrastructure investments. And so I'm very happy with how things went, but that's just something that would have been, I think, exciting. And I see with a lot of my clients now.
Yeah. I think that's a very poignant point. about the suite of products being more appealing for retailers. I think that's great. All right. Last word is to you. How would you encourage all the founders to get a hold of you, talk to you? How open are you to those conversations type thing? What's your invitation? Knowing, and as I've alluded to, I'm going to twist your rubber arm to get involved with us at startups.com. We're so excited. We'd be privileged to work with you. I think you represent so much value, but everybody else listening or wants to, really get in on the action, what's your invitation to them?
I would love to connect with everybody that's listening. I'm thrilled about all the work that startups.com is doing and you and the team have done for entrepreneurs. I know it's just the beginning. I love working with entrepreneurs and founders. By all means, each and everyone can contact me. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm Becca Brown. I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida. So you should find me that way, Columbia Business School. You can email me at becca@coresatellitepartners.com. And I look forward to hearing from everybody.
I will make sure I put all that information in the notes and in the description. And once again, I just want to give a glowing endorsement. I myself have sent founders in Becca's direction, and everything has come back like, we've compared notes and all these things. So I think this is important that us as advisors, we build that relationship of trust, knowing where we come from, knowing our philosophies, methodologies. And I so appreciate everything you represent when it comes to CPG, female founder, advisor, really, getting in there, getting into the front lines and duking it out every single day. Thank you so much for participating in this, and we will have more conversations. Thanks, Becca.
Thank you, Ed.